New York had a way of swallowing people whole, and Naomi Carter felt that truth scrape against her skin every single day. From sunrise until long after midnight, she moved through the city like a ghost, pinned to a scheduled coffee shop. Barista at Dawn Hotel. Housekeeper in the afternoon. Food delivery biker at night. 3 jobs. 3 uniforms. 3 versions of the same exhausted girl, still pretending she had it all under control. She smiled for customers, apologized when they complained, whispered, "Have a good day," with a voice that often trembled from holding back tears. She had mastered the art of appearing strong. Chin-lifted shoulders, squared, curls, tied tightly so they wouldn't betray her shaking. But strength was a strange, fragile thing. It only lasted so long before cracking. And when the city finally quieted, when Naomi returned to the tiny shared apartment, only to find Malik asleep on the couch, with his small chest rising shakily, the cracks inside her widened like fault lines. Malik, her 8-year-old brother, was all she had left in the world. Their parents had died in a car crash 3 years ago, leaving Naomi barely 18 then, to navigate adulthood overnight. She became mother, sister, provider, protector, everything. She filled out forms she barely understood, took on jobs she wasn't old enough for, signed whatever papers allowed her to keep Malik out of the foster system. She had promised her parents she'd keep him safe, and she always kept her promises, until life proved sometimes promises weren't enough. Malik's heart condition had been a shadow lurking for years, silent and unnoticed, until the day he collapsed at school. Naomi still remembered the call, the panic in the teacher's voice, the way her knees buckled on the subway, the sprint through hospital hallways with her chest burning more than her lungs. When she reached his bedside, Malik looked so small against the white sheets, his breaths thin and uneven, his fingers clutching hers like she was the only thing anchoring him to this world. The doctors said he needed surgery. Urgent, expensive, impossible. Naomi begged for better payment plans, pleaded for charity options, filled out more applications than she could count. Every answer was the same. "We're sorry, but..." That sentence haunted her until she could no longer cry. She had cried enough for a lifetime already. That evening, standing alone outside the hospital dormitory building, with cold air cutting her cheeks and city lights glowing like indifferent stars, Naomi pressed a hand to the window where Malik slept inside. His face was peaceful, his breath shallow but steady, and seeing it made something in her chest twist so violently, she thought it might break her ribs. "I'll fix this," she whispered, forehead against the cold glass. "I don't care what it takes." And she meant it. She'd sell her dreams, her youth, her body if she had to, because life wasn't fair. But she refused to let it take Malik too. The next day at the diner where she worked the night shift, her coworker Jenna noticed the dark circles under her eyes, the way her hands shook when she poured coffee. "Naomi, sweetie, you look like you're dying," Jenna said quietly. "What's going on?" Naomi didn't want to tell her, but exhaustion weakened her guard. Words slipped out: hospital bills, surgery, no insurance, no family, no options. Jenna listened with brows drawn tight, then leaned in conspiratorially. "There's a place," she whispered. "A program. It's unconventional, but it pays more money than anything else could." Naomi blinked, confused. What kind of program? Jenna hesitated. Surrogacy. Private. High-end. Very selective. Naomi almost laughed. "Jenna, I can barely afford bus fare. Why would any high-end anything want me?" But Jenna wasn't joking. She scribbled an address and slid it across the counter. "Just go. You never know." Naomi pocketed the note, but didn't believe any of it. Why would the rich choose someone like her? She wasn't perfect or polished or educated. She was color and softness and survival instinct, all wrapped into a girl who wore thrift store jeans and carried her whole world on her back. Still, 2 days later, she found herself walking toward a sleek white building on Park Avenue Sterling program, etched in silver letters above revolving glass doors. Inside, everything felt too quiet, too clean, too sterile. A receptionist with perfect hair and a perfect smile handed her a clipboard full of forms and spoke with a voice as smooth as marble. "We provide fully legal surrogacy arrangements for private clients," she explained. "All medical expenses, housing, and compensation are included." Naomi nodded, pretending she didn't feel like an imposter. Then the woman slid a brochure toward her. Naomi skimmed it and froze. Compensation, $500, $1,000. The world around her flickered. She gripped the edge of the table to steady herself. She could almost hear her heart pounding. Malik laughing again. Malik running again. Malik growing up, going to college, living. $500,000. $500,000 for 9 months. $500,000 to save her brother's life. But of course, there was a catch. "There are specific requirements," the woman said. "The client desires a fully controlled environment. You would live on site. No unsupervised outings. No alcohol, stimulants, or unauthorized contact. And..." She paused, eyeing Naomi with unsettling precision. "Only candidates who are medically confirmed virgins will be considered." Naomi blinked, stunned. "A virgin? Why? Why does that even matter?" "It's not unusual among elite clients," the woman replied coolly. "Higher implantation success rate, fewer variables. It's purely clinical." Naomi wasn't stupid. Nothing about this was purely clinical. But when she thought of Malik again, his little chest rising too slowly, too painfully, logic didn't stand a chance against desperation. "Do you have questions?" the woman asked. Naomi tried to laugh, but it came out soft and broken. "Only one," she murmured. "You're telling me I can't fall in love while doing this? I haven't even had a chance to love anyone yet. So how exactly would you stop me?" Her attempt at humor only highlighted the emptiness she had tried to ignore for years. She had never been kissed, never held, never cherished. Life had been survival, not romance. The idea that someone would forbid her from falling in love felt almost absurd, until she realized the danger wasn't that they forbade it, but that she might break the rule without meaning to. Because love had a way of arriving at the worst possible time. As Naomi left the intake room with a folder of details, something tugged at her chest, a whisper of warning she didn't understand. She paused outside the tall glass doors, clutching the papers, staring at the sky that suddenly felt heavy and low. She felt a strange pressure behind her ribs, as if her heart sensed something her mind could not yet grasp. Later that night, she showed Malik's nurse the preliminary approval note from Sterling program. It wasn't a contract yet, just an invitation for further evaluation, but the nurse squeezed Naomi's hand. "This could be it," she said. "This could save him." Naomi nodded, though her throat had tightened too much to speak. She should have felt relieved, triumphant, hopeful. But instead, a quiet unease settled over her, spreading like ink in water. It followed her as she walked home under streetlights. It hovered when she paused at a crosswalk and stared at her reflection in a store window, wide brown eyes staring back at her as if asking a question she couldn't answer. And when she finally reached her apartment, tucked Malik into bed, and wrapped her arms around herself in the darkness, that unease only grew heavier. The next morning the program called. She'd been advanced to the final stage. She'd meet the clients soon, the people who would decide whether her body, her life, her future were worth their investment. She hung up the phone and sank to the floor, trembling. This was it. The turning point. The choice that would preserve Malik's life and dismantle her own. She thought she was prepared for sacrifice, prepared to give everything. What she wasn't prepared for was the invisible path ahead, the one she hadn't chosen, the one stretching into a world far richer, colder, and more dangerous than anything she had ever known. And somewhere deep inside, beneath fear and exhaustion and duty, something fluttered awake, a faint, fragile spark she didn't recognize. Not hope, not bravery. Something far more reckless, something she didn't yet have a name for. But she would, very soon. Because her life was about to collide with a man who would rewrite every rule she thought she understood. And the irony of her earlier words, "I've never even had the chance to fall in love," would come back to haunt her in ways she could never imagine. The black car eased up the circular driveway like it knew exactly where it belonged, gliding beneath the arch of glass and steel that formed the entrance of the Sterling estate. Naomi had seen mansions before on magazine covers, in movies, through tinted windows, while delivering takeout, but nothing had prepared her for the quiet, suffocating elegance of this place. It didn't shout wealth. It whispered it in the stillness of the air, in the cold perfection of the architecture, in the way the entire house seemed to exist, just slightly above the world she'd always known. Her palms were already sweating when the doors opened automatically, and a woman stepped forward, poised like she'd been carved from light and marble. Victoria Sterling. The name alone held weight: articles, interviews, charity galas, fashion features. But seeing her in person was something else entirely. Tall, slim, immaculate. In a cream suit that probably cost more than Naomi's yearly income, she carried herself with the kind of confidence that made other people instinctively shrink. Naomi stood very still, unsure what to do with her arms, or her breath, or the sudden awareness of every wrinkle in her thrifted blouse. Victoria's eyes swept over her with clinical efficiency, not unkind, but not warm either, as if evaluating whether this 21-year-old girl was worth 5 seconds of her time. "Ms. Carter," she greeted, voice polished, soft, but unmistakably commanding. "Thank you for coming." Naomi tried to answer, but her voice caught in her throat. She corrected herself quickly, nodding, offering a small smile. "Thank you for having me." Victoria turned slightly, gesturing with one graceful hand toward the open living space beyond the vestibule. "We'll conduct the final interview inside. My husband will join us shortly." "My husband." The words carried a subtle weight Naomi didn't understand yet, but she felt it. A strange flutter of anticipation tightened in her stomach, and she tried to steady herself by focusing on the floor tiles beneath her feet. They were so polished, she could see her reflection. A nervous girl with wide brown eyes and curls pinned back too tightly, hoping she didn't look as out of place as she felt. They stepped into the living room, though calling it a room felt inaccurate. It was a world unto itself. White marble vaulted ceilings, floor-to-ceiling windows that framed Central Park like a personal painting. Art pieces dotted the walls, abstracts, sculptures, things Naomi couldn't name but could tell were expensive. Everything was arranged to look effortless, though it must have taken an army to make it so. Victoria walked with the smooth precision of someone used to being watched. Naomi followed, trying to mimic her confidence, but her heart pounded with the unbearable awareness of her own smallness. She perched on the edge of the sofa. Victoria indicated, afraid to crease or smudge anything. The silence between them grew sharp, taut. Naomi felt like she was being examined under a microscope. She was about to ask something, anything, just to ease the tension, when the quiet shifted. It was small at first, the soft click of a door at the far end of the room. But the energy in the space changed instantly, like air inhaling and refusing to exhale. Naomi looked up, and then she saw him. Alexander Sterling stepped inside, without hurry. Yet the moment he appeared, the room seemed to rearrange itself around him. He was taller than she had expected, broad-shouldered, impossibly composed, the kind of presence that made the air feel heavier, more significant. His dark suit fit him with effortless precision. But it wasn't his clothes that made Naomi's breath catch. It was his eyes, cool steel gray, sharp as frost, fixed directly on her from the moment he crossed the threshold. She felt the world around her fade into something muted, distant. It was ridiculous how immediate the sensation was, how her body reacted before her mind had time to form a single coherent thought. She didn't just see him. She felt him in a way that made her pulse leap in her neck. Victoria's voice cut through the moment. "Alexander, this is Naomi Carter, the final candidate." He approached them with quiet, steady steps. Naomi swallowed hard, unable to look away, even if she wanted to. He wasn't smiling, but his expression wasn't cold either, more like he was trying to read her without giving anything away. When he finally stopped in front of her, he extended his hand. "Welcome, Naomi," he said, and his voice was deeper than she expected, smooth but grounded a quiet gravity. She placed her hand in his. It should have been simple, polite, nothing more than a formal greeting. But the instant his skin brushed hers, something electric rushed up her arm, startling her so much she gasped softly. His grip was firm, but controlled warm against her trembling fingers. Naomi knew he felt it too, not because he reacted, but because of the barely perceptible pause, the microsecond, where he didn't let go as quickly as he should have. He released her hand gently, as if aware of its lingering effect. Naomi's face warmed. Her heartbeat stuttered, stumbled, then sprinted. She couldn't remember the last time she'd touched anyone like that, if she ever truly had. Alexander sat opposite her, but his eyes remained on her far longer than propriety demanded. Victoria didn't seem to notice, or she pretended not to. She launched into a series of questions: Naomi's health history, family background, living situation, stress tolerance. Naomi answered carefully, trying not to sound as terrified as she felt. But every few seconds she felt Alexander's gaze return to her, quiet, attentive, assessing not her answers, but her. The way she sat, the way she breathed, the way her voice shook on certain words, the way she tried so hard to appear stronger than she felt. It was unnerving, and yet comforting too, in a strange way she didn't have the courage to unpack. At one point, Victoria asked, "Why do you believe you're prepared for a commitment?" This demanding. Naomi opened her mouth, but the answer lodged in her throat. She didn't want to mention Malik, or her desperation, or that she lacked every choice other candidates might have had. She didn't want to sound like a charity case, even though that was exactly what she was. After a long second, she managed, "Because I've had to grow up fast. I've learned to survive whatever life gives me. I don't break easily." Her voice was soft but steady, though her hands twisted nervously in her lap. Alexander leaned forward slightly, brows drawing together with interest. Something flickered in his eyes. Respect, maybe. Recognition. Or something Naomi was too overwhelmed to identify. Victoria asked another question, and then another, each one sharper than the last. Naomi answered, all of them feeling more exposed with every passing minute. She didn't notice she was holding her breath until Alexander spoke for the first time since shaking her hand. "What do you want after all this?" he asked suddenly. His tone wasn't cold or interview-like. It was quieter almost. Personal. Naomi blinked, startled. Victoria shot him a quick look, but he didn't acknowledge it. He kept his gaze on Naomi, patient, waiting. No one had asked her what she wanted in a long time. The question struck something tender in her chest. "I want..." She hesitated, then exhaled slowly. "I want Malik to be okay. And maybe when all of this is over, I want to remember what it feels like to have my own life, to not be scared all the time." Alexander's gaze softened, not visibly, just enough that she felt it like a shift in temperature. For the first time since she'd stepped inside the mansion, she felt seen, truly seen. but that terrified her even more, because she wasn't supposed to feel anything here. Not awe, not comfort, and definitely not the stupid, reckless flutter beating against her ribs every time Alexander looked at her like she wasn't just another girl applying for a contract. She tried to focus on Victoria's next question, but she could feel Alexander's attention anchoring her in place, tugging something inside her she didn't know existed. It wasn't just attraction, it was recognition somehow. As if the air between them had been waiting far longer than either of them had lived. By the time the interview ended, Naomi felt dizzy. Victoria stood and thanked her politely, but the room felt too bright, too warm, too close. Alexander rose more slowly, still watching her with that unreadable expression. When Naomi turned to leave, he stepped closer, just a fraction, just near enough for his voice to reach her alone. "We'll be in touch," he murmured. It shouldn't have meant anything, but it did. Too much. Naomi walked out of the Sterling mansion on shaky legs, the cool air hitting her lungs like a shock. She clutched her bag tightly, replaying every moment, every glance, every brush of his hand. She had come seeking a contract, a lifeline, a way to save her brother. She hadn't expected to feel anything, especially not this. But as she descended the stone steps, heart hammering and breath trembling, Naomi realized something unsettling, something she wasn't ready to confront. The first man to ever make her heart race wasn't someone she could have. He was the husband of the woman who wanted to buy her womb, and the one man she was forbidden by contract and by reality to fall for. And yet she already feared it was too late. The day Naomi moved into the Sterling estate felt unreal, as if she had been quietly removed from her own life and placed into a different world, a world too polished, too silent, too carefully controlled. The car that picked her up had tinted windows so dark she couldn't see the city passing by, only her own reflection, staring back at her wide-eyed and frightened, pretending to be brave for Malik. When the car finally rolled through the gates, she saw the estate again, but this time she felt its magnitude in her bones. It wasn't a house, it was a fortress, and she was about to become its newest inmate. Inside, everything gleamed. The floors mirrored her footsteps. The hallways stretched farther than she could count, and every sound, every whisper of wind, every shift of fabric seemed swallowed by the cold precision of the space. Staff members moved like shadows, expressionless and perfectly timed. They weren't unfriendly, just distant, trained. Naomi felt their glances in brief flickers. Curiosity, pity, maybe even resentment, but no one said anything beyond what their job required. A woman named Mara, dressed in a soft gray uniform and wearing an earpiece that never seemed to stop buzzing, led Naomi down a bright corridor. "This will be your suite," she said, opening a door that was nearly twice Naomi's height. The room inside looked like a five-star hotel advertisement. Cream walls, gold accents, a king-size bed with pillows arranged in perfect symmetry, silk curtains that draped all the way to the floor. It smelled faintly of jasmine and expensive wood polish. Naomi stepped in slowly, overwhelmed by the size alone. Her entire apartment back home could have fit inside the bathroom. But the opulence didn't comfort her. It only reminded her how far she was from Malik, from the life she had fought so hard to keep together. This room wasn't hers. Nothing here belonged to her, not even the body she had promised to give away for 9 months. As Mara went over the specifics, mealtimes, medical check-ins, security protocols, psychological sessions, Naomi felt each word tighten around her like an invisible rope. There were cameras over the doorway, cameras in the hallway, a discreet one mounted in the corner near her bed. She was told it wasn't active during dressing hours, but no one explained how they defined those hours. Every meal she would consume was listed on an app. Calorie counts, nutrient breakdowns, precise portions. Her schedule for the week was printed and placed on her nightstand. Monitored walks, monitored meditation, monitored sleep cycles. Naomi listened, nodding, because she didn't know what else to do. But inside her chest ached with something sour and humiliating. She had wanted to save Malik. She had chosen this. And yet, staring at the camera that blinked red for calibration, she felt her throat close. For the first time since agreeing to the arrangement, she felt the full weight of the price she had chosen to pay. When Mara left, closing the door gently behind her, the silence rushed in like water sinking a ship. Naomi sat on the edge of the bed, running her fingers over the smooth bedding, and the loneliness crept up fast, faster than she could brace for. She placed her face in her hands, the pressure behind her eyes burning the air thick with a grief she didn't know how to express. She wasn't alone. Yet she had never felt more isolated. Hours passed in a haze of unpacking medical assessments and whispered instructions. By the time night fell, the exhaustion in her bones was so deep she no longer trusted her legs to hold her. She showered, changed into the sleepwear left neatly folded for her, and slid under the covers. But lying in that vast, unfamiliar bed only made her feel more exposed. She couldn't sleep. Every few minutes she would open her eyes, check the corners of the room, listen for footsteps outside her door. It was close to midnight when it happened. A soft, almost hesitant knock. 3 quiet taps. Naomi froze, breath caught in her chest. She considered ignoring it, pulling the covers up, and pretending she hadn't heard. But something in the sound, gentle, unassuming, pulled her out of bed. She padded barefoot to the door, hesitated only a second, then opened it a few inches. And there he was, Alexander. His tie was gone. Shirt sleeves rolled carelessly up, hair slightly mussed, as if he had run his hands through it too many times that day. He looked nothing like the composed billionaire she'd met in the interview. This version of him standing barefoot in the hallway, with his hands in his pockets, and the faint tiredness beneath his eyes, seemed startlingly human. "Sorry," he said quietly. His voice was lower than it had been earlier, softer somehow. "I didn't mean to wake you. I wasn't sleeping," Naomi admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. She held the door at an awkward angle, unsure if she should open it more or close it entirely. Alexander glanced past her into the room, then back to her face. He didn't attempt to step inside. He stayed where he was, a silent reassurance that he wouldn't cross a line unless she asked him to. "I wanted to check if you were settling in all right," he said, almost hesitant. "Today must have been a lot." Naomi's chest tightened. It was too much, this concern, this attention, this unexpected gentleness from a man she barely knew, but couldn't stop noticing. "I'm adjusting," she said, trying to. A pause. "It's just different from home." He nodded, and something like sympathy flickered across his features. "It would be strange if it wasn't." She exhaled shakily. "It's just, everything here is so controlled. I didn't realize how much until you felt it," he finished for her, his tone almost apologetic. Naomi met his eyes, and for a moment, she forgot every rule, every warning, every reason she shouldn't be standing here talking to him like this. His gaze wasn't cold the way it had been before. It held a quiet warmth that made her stomach flutter to life. "You don't have to stay if you want to leave," he said, suddenly surprising her. "Not everything here is fixed. Not everything is decided." She blinked. "But the contract is a framework," he interrupted gently. "Not a prison." But the way he said it, soft, conflicted, made her wonder who exactly he was trying to convince. She wanted to ask him what he meant, what rules even he felt tethered by in this house. But before she could form the words, he shifted slightly, weight, moving from one foot to the other, as if he were fighting the impulse to step closer. "I'll let you rest," he murmured. "I just wanted to make sure you were okay. It should have ended there. It should have been simple." But as he turned to go, Naomi felt something tug at her, a small, reckless urge she didn't recognize. "Alexander." He paused. Naomi swallowed. "Thank you." His expression softened in a way she wasn't prepared for. "Good night, Naomi." He walked away down the long corridor, quiet as a shadow, and Naomi stood at the doorway long after he disappeared around the corner. When she finally returned to bed, her heart was no longer racing from fear or uncertainty, but from something far more dangerous. She didn't sleep for hours. The next days only deepened the strange tension weaving itself through her new routine. She lived inside a schedule that didn't belong to her in a room that wasn't hers, monitored by people who seemed to know more about her body than she did. But every corridor held the possibility of seeing him again. Brief glances from across the hall, a nod when their paths crossed near the garden door, his voice drifting through the house like a melody she wasn't meant to hear. He never approached her again at night, never repeated the intimate softness of that first evening. But Naomi sensed something shifting beneath the surface, something unspoken but undeniable, something that made her chest tighten whenever she saw the faintest hint of weariness on his face. And the house itself seemed to sense it too. One afternoon during a medical check-in, Naomi overheard whispers from two staff members outside the door. Did he go to her room that night? He checks on everything, the other whispered back. That doesn't mean it does, the first insisted. Not with him, not with her. Naomi's heart lurched. So people already noticed. People were watching. People were speculating. Her cheeks burned, but not from embarrassment, from fear. Because she was already beginning to understand the truth. She wished she could ignore. She wasn't just living in a controlled environment. She was living inside a minefield. And Alexander Sterling, quiet, tired, impossibly gentle in moments he shouldn't be, was the most dangerous part of it. As she lay awake that night, staring at the ceiling, while the soft red camera light blinked in the dark, Naomi realized the true conflict wasn't the contract or the rules or the mansion itself. It was the simple, devastating fact that her heart had started to respond to a man she was forbidden to feel anything for. And worse than that, she feared he was beginning to respond too. Day after day, Naomi moved through the Sterling estate, like a figure trapped between two worlds, one where she was monitored, measured, controlled, and another that existed only in fleeting seconds, slipping through the cracks of the rules whenever Alexander appeared. And somehow in the quietest moments, she felt more alive than she had in years. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't loud. It was the opposite, gentle, subtle, dangerously subtle. A hand brushing the door open for her, the barely there warmth of his palm against her back when they crossed the stairs at the same time, the way he slowed his steps so she wouldn't have to hurry across the marble floors. These were small things, things no one else would have noticed or questioned. Gestures so simple, they should have meant nothing. Yet to her, they glowed like stolen stars in the suffocating universe she had entered. Whenever she passed the dining room, he'd look up briefly from his laptop. Just a glance, just a flicker of gray eyes, but it made her heart tug in a way that felt shameful and tender all at once. Sometimes she found a cup of warm ginger tea outside her door when she coughed after morning checkups. No note, no explanation. She didn't need one. His care was quiet, almost accidental, as if he couldn't stop himself, even though he should. Victoria, on the other hand, ran the estate like a queen guarding her kingdom, her heels sharp on the marble, her schedule sharpened even more. She monitored Naomi like a scientist observing a specimen, clinical, detached, careful not to let anything human seep through the cracks. And because Naomi felt that coldness every hour of the day, those quiet touches from Alexander felt even more electric. She didn't want them to matter. She wished she could train her heart to stay still, to stay rational, to remember the contract that bound her body and the life forming inside it. But emotions weren't contracts. They weren't negotiable. They happened quietly the way snow falls, even when the world isn't ready. The turning point came on a night that should have been simple. She couldn't sleep again. Not unusual, not surprising. The house was too quiet at night, too still, the silence pressing on her chest, until she felt the urge to escape it. She wandered through the hallway barefoot, her fingers brushing the cool walls, as she moved toward the one place in the house where she felt something other than monitored. The piano room. She didn't expect anyone to be there. She didn't even think Alexander played at night anymore, not after the last time she'd seen him there, the night when music and loneliness braided themselves into something she still didn't dare unpack. But when she stepped into the doorway, she stopped. He was there. Alexander sat at the piano in the dark, the only light coming from a few flickering candles on the far side of the room. Their glow cast warm shadows across his face, softening the sharp angles she had memorized against her will. He didn't look like the billionaire who commanded boardrooms. He looked like a man carrying a weight he didn't know how to set down. His fingers moved slowly over the keys, coaxing out a melody that was deep and aching, something that made the room feel smaller, more intimate, the kind of music that slipped under the skin and whispered truths no one dared say. Naomi stood frozen, her breath caught in her throat, because she felt that melody too vividly. It sounded like longing. It sounded like someone grieving something they had never fully possessed. And God help her, it sounded like the space between them. She stepped forward, drawn as if the notes themselves reached out and pulled her in. The soft sweep of the piano filled the air until she could feel it in her bones, warming something inside her she thought had died long before she signed her name on that contract. Alexander sensed her before he saw her. His playing slowed, softened, then faded into silence as he turned his head. His eyes found her through the low candlelight, and time-tripped stumbled, then simply stopped. He didn't look away. Neither did she. In that suspended second, there were no rules, no boundaries, no doctors or contracts, or Victoria's icy stare hovering like a warning. There was only the quiet pull between two people who should never have been standing in the same room like this, looking at each other the way they were. Naomi swallowed, her voice barely working. "I didn't mean to interrupt." "You didn't," he said softly. "You never do." Something inside her fluttered painfully at the sincerity in his tone. He shifted slightly on the bench as if fighting the urge to stand, walk toward her, maybe even reach for her. She felt the tension in the air, like a hand on her skin, gentle, invisible, undeniable. She stepped closer, her heartbeat loud in her ears. "I didn't know you played." He gave a quiet breath of a laugh, one that wasn't quite laughter at all. "I used to," he murmured. Then life got louder than music. She stopped a few feet away from him, the piano between them like a fragile line neither dared cross. "Why tonight?" His eyes dropped to the keys. Some nights feel heavier than others, and music makes it bearable. Naomi understood that more than she could admit. Silence grew between them, not awkward, not empty, but full-charged, as if anything spoken aloud would break whatever delicate thread held them together in that moment. He lifted his gaze again, searching her face in a way that made her chest tighten. She wondered if he was trying to read her thoughts. She wondered if they were the same as his. "Are you all right?" he asked, voice barely above a whisper. She nodded, though her throat tightened. "I should be," she said. "They say I'm doing everything right. Eating right, resting right, thinking right." She gave a small, brittle smile. "I think that's the part that scares me." He looked at her, as if her honesty reached straight into him. "You're allowed to be scared." Her eyes stung unexpectedly. I feel like I'm pretending. Like I'm living someone else's life in someone else's house inside someone else's rules. You're not a possession, Naomi. His voice was suddenly firm beneath the softness. You're not something to be managed. But that's how it feels. He closed his eyes for a moment, as if the confession hurt him. I know. When he opened them again, the pain in his expression was unshielded. Raw. Real. The candlelight made his features look softer, more vulnerable, like he had stopped holding himself together for one fragile moment. Naomi didn't realize she had taken another small step until she felt the piano at her hip. Alexander noticed too. His breath hitched almost imperceptibly, and his hand hovered above the keys as if unsure what to do with himself. Their eyes held, and held, and held. She felt it then, the truth she had been trying so hard to ignore, that she had started to want him. Quietly, irreversibly. It wasn't the grand sweeping kind of desire she had seen in movies. It was slower, more dangerous, the kind that built itself from small kindnesses and soft glances, and moments like this, where two souls recognized each other in the dark. Naomi, he whispered. Just her name. But it felt like something sacred. Her heart trembled. Her body remembered every accidental brush of his hand, every gentle touch disguised as politeness. She remembered the ginger tea outside her door, the worry in his voice, the way he looked at her like she mattered not because of what she carried, but because of who she was. And suddenly she realized she had traveled miles past the boundary she promised herself she wouldn't cross. I shouldn't be here, she breathed, though she didn't move. I know, he said, though he didn't move either. The piano stood between them, but it felt like the only thing saving them from something irreversible. His voice was soft, barely a whisper. I should go, but he didn't stand, and she didn't step back. They stayed like that. Two people divided by rules and loyalty and fear, but drawn together by something too powerful, too human, too impossible to deny. It would have taken only one step, one touch, one small surrender. But Alexander finally inhaled a shaky breath, pushed himself up from the bench, and forced the space to grow between them again. He didn't walk past her. He walked around deliberately, as if any closer movement might break both of them. When he reached the door, he paused, one hand on the frame. He didn't look back when he whispered, voice rough, "Good night, Naomi." Her heart cracked at the way he said her name, like he was holding on to it too tightly. "Good night," she whispered back. When he was gone, she stood alone in the candlelit room, her pulse still thrumming with the ghost of his presence. And that was the moment Naomi knew, truly knew, that she had stepped into something far deeper than danger. She had stepped into longing. And longing would cost her far more than any contract ever could. Naomi didn't expect her breath to catch the way it did when the doctor whispered two simple words. It worked. The room felt smaller, suddenly, warmer, almost unreal. Her chest tightened, and the air seemed too thick to breathe. She knew this moment was coming, but knowing was different from feeling. Feeling made her hands tremble on her lap, made her stomach flutter, not from nausea, but from the reality settling under her skin. She was pregnant, and the weight of that truth, what it meant for Malik, what it meant for her, hit with a force that both grounded her and shattered her at once. She didn't expect Alexander to arrive so fast. It was as if he had been waiting outside the door, listening for any hint of news. Before she could straighten herself, he was already in front of her, dropping to one knee, not touching her, not daring, but close enough that she could feel the warmth of his breath and hear the uneven rhythm of his heart. His suit creased at the knee, and for the first time since she'd met him, he didn't look composed, didn't look untouchable. He looked human, vulnerable, terrified, and it shattered her further. "Naomi." His voice was low, almost hoarse, like a man walking through fog without knowing where the ground ended. "Are you scared?" She tried to answer, but her voice broke on the first attempt. She simply nodded, her lips trembling. She hadn't meant to show fear. She thought she had locked it away behind the same wall she kept for hunger and exhaustion, and the silent ache for home. But standing in front of him, she couldn't hide it. Alexander's eyes softened in a way that made her chest ache. He looked into her the way no one ever had, not with pity, not with expectation, but with a depth that told her he saw all of it, the bravery and the fear and the loneliness tangled together. "You're not alone," he murmured. "I'm right here. I won't let you go through this by yourself." He stood slowly, giving her space, yet staying close enough to steady her if she swayed. And she almost did. His presence always had that effect on her, a strange mix of safety and danger, like a hand offered at the edge of a cliff. From that day on, something shifted. Maybe it was subtle to the rest of the world, but not to her, and definitely not to him. Every night afterward, he found a reason to check on her. Sometimes he stopped by under the excuse of asking whether her vitamins upset her stomach. Other times, he pretended he couldn't recall the details of her next appointment and needed her to remind him. But those were just excuses, flimsy shields, for something neither of them dared to name. The real conversations always began after the practical questions faded away. He asked about Malik, his favorite shows, his dreams, whether he liked superheroes or astronauts more. He wanted to know what Naomi drew when she didn't have to draw for anyone else. She told him she sketched hands, mostly hands, reaching for something they couldn't quite hold. She didn't tell him why. He asked about her childhood. She answered honestly. It was loud. It was messy. It was loving until it wasn't. Life had carved pieces out of her until she learned to stop expecting softness. Alexander fell silent, listening to her, his eyes darkening with something she didn't understand. Then one night, he asked the question that cracked something open inside her. "Did anyone ever treat you the way you deserved?" Even once. She hadn't expected that. It wasn't a question about the pregnancy, the program, or her health. It was about her, about the girl she had been, the woman she was, now the soul she didn't show anyone. She didn't have an answer. That silence spoke for her, and his jaw tightened, as if the absence of love in her life physically pained him. He didn't say anything else after that, but she carried that moment with her like a quiet ember. Over the following days, she noticed that whenever she thought of him, she instinctively touched her stomach, a subconscious gesture she couldn't explain. Maybe because the child inside her tied her to him in ways that went beyond contracts or rules. Maybe because love, even unnamed, even denied, had a way of finding the smallest spaces to grow inside people who needed it most. But she knew she was crossing a line she shouldn't even be able to see, let alone approach. Because this wasn't her world, this wasn't her man, and the life forming inside her wasn't hers to keep. Yet her heart didn't care. Her heart wanted to reach for him the way her hands used to reach in those drawings, towards something impossible, knowing she could never touch it. Victoria's presence in the house only made that longing sharper. Naomi felt the shift in the air whenever the other woman entered a room, elegant, poised, impeccably controlled. Victoria never raised her voice, never accused, never snapped. She didn't need to. Her eyes said everything. This is my house, my husband, my legacy. And you are here only as long as I allow it. She didn't have to speak the words. Naomi felt them each morning in the schedule printed on her bedside table, in the precise meals weighed to the gram, in the recited reminders of her role. It was impossible to ignore the difference between the cold calculation of one woman and the quiet warmth of the man they both relied on. That contrast only pulled Naomi deeper into something she wasn't prepared to feel. The moment that tipped everything came one evening, when she found herself sitting in the conservatory, a place filled with soft light and quiet plants, her hands resting on her stomach. She wasn't even thinking, just stroking absent-mindedly, tracing the curve of the new life, as if trying to soothe the tiny flutter of nerves inside her. She had never imagined that carrying a child, someone else's child, could feel this tender. She wasn't prepared for her body to change so quickly, or for her heart to change even faster. And then, she felt him. Not physically, emotionally. Alexander had a presence, a gravity, and she always sensed him before she saw him. She looked up startled, catching him watching her from the doorway. He wasn't trying to be stealthy. He wasn't hiding. His expression was open in a way she had never seen before. He stepped into the room slowly, as if approaching something fragile. "You look peaceful," he said quietly. But what he meant was, "You look beautiful." She felt heat rise in her chest. "I was just thinking," she murmured. "About him? Or her?" She nodded. "About everything." He hesitated, then sat across from her, elbows on his knees, hands clasped as if fighting the instinct to reach for her. "You're stronger than you think," he said, voice low. "Most people fall apart under pressure. You rise." Naomi's breath hitched, because she wanted to believe that. She wanted someone, anyone, to see strength in her rather than sacrifice. He leaned forward slightly, eyes locked onto hers. "You deserve more than this program, more than this house, more than a life spent fighting alone." His voice softened even further. "You deserve to be loved." She swallowed hard, her palms suddenly damp. "Alexander." "I know," he said quickly. "I shouldn't say this. I know what the rules are." His eyes flickered with something almost desperate. "But I can't stop caring." The air between them grew tight, heavy, charged with a truth neither could back away from now. And Naomi realized, with a quiet, terrifying certainty, that a single word, one confession, one surrender, could destroy everything, or save them both. The baby, Malik, the contract, Victoria, the fragile, impossible thread pulling her toward Alexander. Everything balanced on a razor-thin edge between duty and desire. So Naomi just sat there, heart pounding, staring into the eyes of the man she should never love, while the man she should never love stared back at her like she was the one thing he wanted and couldn't touch. And she thought, with a kind of sad, aching clarity, if life had been a little kinder, maybe I could have been his. Naomi didn't know the world could shatter from a single photograph, but that morning it did. She had just finished a wellness check, still wiping the cold gel from her stomach, when she saw the staff whispering. Eyes wide, fingers clenched around their phones. Mara's face went pale. The head of security spoke urgently into his earpiece. Even the silence of the house changed, growing sharper, brittle, as if something fragile had cracked open. When the article flashed across one of the tablets left on the counter, Naomi felt her stomach drop. There, in grainy zoom, was her own face caught mid-laugh, head slightly tilted toward Alexander as they walked through the garden. It was innocent. It was nothing. But the caption beneath it was not. Billionaire Alexander Sterling, expecting child with secret lover. The words hit her like a slap, not because they were untrue, but because they twisted the one thing she never meant for anyone to see: how she looked at him, how he looked at her. Victoria saw it too. Naomi didn't have to be in the room when she found out. The house itself felt the storm roll through its corridors. Doors slammed. Orders hissed through clenched teeth. staff scattered like shadows fleeing light. Naomi barely had time to pack the few clothes she'd brought from New York before security escorted her to a waiting car. No explanation, no goodbye, no chance to see Alexander. Victoria didn't have to say a single word. The message was cruelly perfectly clear. You are a scandal, a threat, a mistake. They flew her to a house in the Florida Keys, a safe house as they called it, though that word felt like a joke the moment the door shut behind her. Safe from who? Safe for what? It was beautiful in the way prisons sometimes are airy rooms, tall palms, a pool that sparkled under the sun. But the quiet was suffocating. There were only 2 staff members, polite but distant, trained not to ask questions or give answers. Naomi could walk the perimeter garden at certain hours, always with someone watching from a distance. Inside, she wandered like a ghost through rooms that didn't belong to her, pausing only to press a hand to her belly when loneliness threatened to swallow her. The first night she waited for him. The second night too. By the third, she told herself she was being foolish. By the fourth, she realized she had memorized every sound of approaching footsteps. By the fifth, she hated her own reflection. He's married. He's loyal to a world you don't belong in. He chose to stay. But the ache inside her didn't listen to reason. It never had. On the 7th day, she stopped looking toward the gate at sunset. She curled up on the couch, trying to tell herself it was better this way, that he was protecting her in the only way he could, by letting her fade from his life. She whispered a lie to herself over and over. You were never anything more than a complication. But the lie hurt more than the truth. By the 8th day, Naomi truly believed she had been abandoned. She sat alone on the back deck, staring at the horizon turning gold and pink behind the ocean. The baby fluttered faintly, a tiny reminder she wasn't entirely alone. But loneliness and pregnancy were a cruel combination. Every tear felt heavier than the one before. She wiped her cheeks with the back of her hand, whispering to the waves, "It's okay. I don't need him. I don't need anyone." She didn't believe it, not even a little. The sun had nearly set when she heard footsteps, not soft ones like the housekeeper's. Heavy, hurried, uneven, like someone running out of breath. Naomi turned slowly, convinced her mind was playing tricks, stitching hope into shadows. But it wasn't a shadow. It was him. Alexander stood at the edge of the deck chest, rising and falling with sharp breaths, shirt wrinkled, sleeves rolled, hair a disheveled mess from the wind, or lack of sleep, or both. He looked like a man who had searched for her across 1,000 miles, and still wasn't sure she was real. His eyes found her, and something inside him broke in plain sight. "Naomi!" Her breath hitched. She rose from her chair, gripping the railing to steady herself. For a moment, neither of them moved, as if afraid the other would vanish. Then he spoke, voice rough, strained. "I'm sorry." 2 words she didn't expect. 2 words she didn't know how to hold. He took a tentative step closer. "I should have come sooner. I know. I know I should have. I thought giving you space was the right thing, with everything blowing up with the coverage with Victoria." He closed his eyes, shaking his head. "But I can't stay away. I tried. I swear I tried." Naomi swallowed, hands trembling. She wanted to be angry. She wanted to yell. But all she could do was whisper, the hurt lodged in her chest. "You don't owe me anything, Alexander. I don't need you to feel responsible." His eyes flashed, not with offense, but with something darker, deeper. "This isn't responsibility." She opened her mouth to protest, but he stepped closer, voice tightening with emotion he could barely contain. "Naomi, look at me." She did. Slowly, fearfully, completely. And in that moment, She saw it, unhidden, unfiltered, raw. Desire, longing, devotion. His voice dropped lower. I'm not here because of obligation. I'm here because I couldn't breathe without you. Her heart stuttered painfully. He stepped again now, only a foot away, and the air between them seemed to crackle. I tried to be rational. I tried to be loyal. I tried to honor every rule, every promise, every damn line I wasn't supposed to cross. His hand lifted halfway, fingers curling as if resisting the urge to touch her. But I can't pretend anymore. Naomi's lips parted, but no sound came out. Alexander exhaled shakily. Naomi, I'm in love with you. Time stopped. The ocean kept moving, but she didn't feel the wind anymore, didn't hear the waves, didn't remember how to stand. Love. He said love. Not affection, not care, not confusion. That word, the one she had never heard from someone she wanted to hear it from. Her knees weakened and tears spilled down her cheeks. Not slow, not graceful, but desperate. Aching tears she couldn't stop. Alexander froze. Naomi. Why? She whispered, voice cracking. Why would you say that? He stepped closer, finally letting his hand brush her arm feather light. Because it's true. She shook her head helplessly, her voice a broken confession. I don't know when it happened, or how. Her eyes met his, shattered, afraid, honest. But I love you too. Saying it felt like jumping off a cliff with no promise of landing safely. And the moment the words left her mouth, she burst into quiet, trembling sobs, not from joy, but from fear so deep it hollowed her out. She was terrified of losing him, terrified of wanting him, terrified of everything that love demanded. Alexander gathered her into his arms, holding her as if she were the first real thing he'd touched in years. He pressed his forehead to hers, voice shaking. We'll figure this out. I swear to you, we will find a way. But Naomi wasn't crying because she doubted him. She was crying because she finally understood the truth she had been running from. This wasn't just a forbidden love. This was the kind of love that cost everything. And now that she had it, she didn't know how to survive losing it. Naomi had imagined the moment of return, 100 different ways, slipping through the back door, ducking behind Alexander, avoiding the eyes of the woman whose life she had accidentally walked into. But when the car rolled through the gates and the familiar marble facade came into view, something inside her shifted. Maybe it was the way Alexander's fingers brushed hers in silent reassurance. Maybe it was the fact that running had never made anything easier. Or maybe it was the tiny life in her belly, reminding her she had nothing left to be ashamed of. So when the car stopped and the doors opened, Naomi didn't hide. She stepped out beside him, shoulder to shoulder, matching his pace as they crossed the foyer. The house felt different now, quieter, as if it knew its truths were about to be dragged into the light. Victoria stood at the top of the grand staircase, hands resting lightly on the railing, posture poised, but not sharp like before. There was no ice in her eyes, no perfectly sculpted fury. Instead, she looked tired, as if she had spent years waging a war she never truly wanted to win. Her gaze drifted from Alexander to Naomi, lingering longer on Naomi than expected. So she said softly, her voice carrying across the marble like a sigh, you came back. Not a question, not an accusation, just a statement shaped by exhaustion. Naomi inhaled, then moved forward before fear could chase her back. I'm not here to take anything from you, she said quietly. I'm here because we all deserve the truth. Victoria studied her for a long moment, her eyes searching Naomi's face, as if looking for some sign of malice, some hint of triumph. but she found none. Naomi wasn't triumphing. She was trembling inside her bones, but she stood still. Then Victoria looked at Alexander, really looked at him, and the air grew thin. "Do you love her?" she asked. The question floated in the quiet like a blade waiting to fall. Alexander didn't flinch. He didn't look away, or stall, or soften the blow. He simply answered with the kind of honesty that left no room for misunderstanding. "Yes." Naomi heard the breath. Victoria took the sharp, controlled inhale of someone who had prepared herself for a wound, but still bled when it came. She closed her eyes for a single second. Just one. But in that second, Naomi saw everything. The years of loneliness hidden behind flawless makeup, the unspoken disappointments, the promises made without heart, the silent cruelty of a marriage built on strategy, not love. When Victoria opened her eyes again, they were shimmering with something fragile. "You haven't loved me for a long time," she whispered. "I think I always knew. I just didn't want to believe it." Then she glanced toward Naomi, and for the first time her expression wasn't cold. It wasn't hostile. It was human. She didn't create this distance, Alexander. It was already there. She only made it visible. He didn't argue. He didn't try to rewrite history. He simply stood there, jaw tight, as if he'd been waiting years to admit the truth laid bare in front of him. "We both deserve something real," he said quietly. Victoria let out a sound, halfway between a laugh and a sob, soft, brittle. "Real," she repeated. "I don't remember the last time I felt that." The moment sat between them, fragile as stained glass, too beautiful and too dangerous to touch. Victoria stepped down the stairs slower than Naomi had ever seen her move. When she reached the bottom, she released a breath she seemed to have been holding for years. "If we're going to talk," she said, "really talk, let's sit somewhere that isn't built for posing." They sat not in the formal lounge, not in the meeting room, but in a sunroom Naomi had never been invited into before, a place filled with light and soft fabrics and books with dog-eared pages. A place that felt lived in. It felt like a confession waiting to happen. And it did. Hours passed, but the sunroom held time still. Victoria spoke first, her voice low, brittle at the edges. She spoke of growing up unwanted, of learning to survive by controlling everything she could, of swearing she'd never be left again. She explained how the marriage to Alexander had never been about romance, but about merging two empires, about proving to the world she could be chosen publicly, permanently, strategically. "Love was never part of the bargain," she murmured, twisting a ring on her finger. "Security was." Alexander listened with a heaviness Naomi had never seen in him, guilt etched into the lines around his eyes. He admitted that their marriage had been built on convenience and ambition, not intimacy. That he had kept his distance long before Naomi entered the picture. That he had been afraid to destroy the illusion they had built for everyone else to admire. "I thought there was honor in staying," he said quietly. "But I was only prolonging our pain." Naomi sat between them, feeling like an intruder in a life she had never meant to break. When it was her turn to speak, she didn't try to defend herself. She didn't pretend innocence. She didn't claim destiny. "I never wanted to hurt either of you," she said softly. "I don't want to be the woman someone points to and says, 'She ruined a marriage.' That's not who I am. I didn't expect this. Any of it." Her hand drifted to her belly. "I came here to save my brother, not to fall in love with someone I shouldn't." Her voice cracked at the end, and she hated that it did, but neither Victoria nor Alexander judged her for it. The air shifted then, something soft and painful and cleansing moving through the room. Victoria looked at her, not with resentment, but with a quiet sadness. "You didn't break us, Naomi," she said gently. We were already broken. You just arrived at the moment the cracks could no longer be hidden. There were tears, unexpected ones. Victoria wiped them discreetly. Alexander didn't bother to hide his. And Naomi, who had tried so hard to be composed, felt her own eyes sting. But none of them apologized for feeling this deeply, because for the first time they weren't acting. They weren't protecting egos or reputations. They were just three flawed people facing the truth. When the sun began to set, painting the room in amber, Victoria stood. No bitterness, no theatrics, just a quiet finality. I think the kindest thing I can do, she said, is leave. She paused, not breaking, not triumphant, simply free. This marriage has been over for a long time. I was just afraid to walk away. She looked at Alexander, her voice softer than Naomi had ever heard it. Thank you for letting me go. She turned to Naomi last. No venom, no ice. Just a woman acknowledging another woman. Take care of yourself, she said, and take care of the child. Whatever happens next, don't let the world decide your worth, either of you. Then she walked out, not as a villain, not as a victim, but as someone shedding a life that had suffocated her for years. The door closed softly behind her, and the house exhaled. Naomi stood frozen for a moment, unsure what she was allowed to feel. Relieved, guilty, hopeful. Everything tangled inside her. Alexander moved toward her, slow and careful as if afraid she might crumble. Are you all right? He asked gently. She didn't know how to answer. She only knew that her heart felt both heavier and lighter. The truth had cost them all something, but it had also set them free. She nodded finally, and Alexander reached for her hand, lacing his fingers with hers. No secrecy now, no stolen glances, no shame. The path ahead was uncertain, but for the first time, it was honest. The rain wasn't heavy that morning, just a fine mist brushing across the windows, painting soft silver lines against the glass. Naomi had always loved the sound of rain, but that day the air felt different, charged, restless, carrying a quiet tension that settled beneath her skin. She woke with a sharp pull low in her abdomen, a sensation she had read about 100 times, but had never quite imagined would feel so real, so powerful, so frightening. The contractions came slowly at first, steady but bearable, and she tried to breathe through them, telling herself it wasn't time yet. But the rain kept falling, and her heartbeat quickened with every minute that passed. When the next contraction hit, she pressed a hand to the wall to steady herself and whispered Alexander's name, not out of fear, but instinct. He had always been the one she reached for, even when she wasn't supposed to. Moments later, the bedroom door burst open. He must have heard her from down the hall, or maybe he sensed her the same way he always did, by the invisible thread that had tied them together long before they admitted what they felt. He rushed to her side, hair slightly disheveled, still in his shirt sleeves. Eyes wide with panic. He couldn't hide. Naomi? He breathed, voice breaking at the edges. Is it? She nodded, unable to speak through the pain that surged again. His hands were on her in an instant, supporting her, grounding her. She had never seen him like this. Not the calm, collected CEO who commanded boardrooms, not the composed man who hid storms behind gray eyes. No, this was Alexander, stripped of every layer, every mask, terrified, helpless, completely, desperately human. He guided her to the car, one arm wrapped around her waist, the other fumbling to grab her hospital bag, even though they'd packed it weeks ago. The rain soaked through his shirt as he helped her in, and he didn't even notice. He kept glancing at her during the drive, one hand gripping the wheel so tightly his knuckles went white, the other reaching for hers during every contraction, as if he couldn't stand the thought of her enduring any of it alone. "It's okay," he whispered over and over, though his voice trembled. "I'm here. I'm here, Naomi." At the hospital, everything became a blur of lights and voices and hurried footsteps. Nurses rushed around them. Doctors gave instructions. But Naomi heard none of it clearly. All she felt was Alexander's hand refusing to let go his thumb, stroking the back of her fingers in shaky circles. He stayed by her side through every wave of pain, every breathless gasp, every moment she thought she couldn't do it anymore. He pressed his forehead to hers between contractions, whispering soft encouragements he didn't know she needed. "You're so strong," he murmured. "You're incredible. I'm right here." His voice cracked more than once. She heard it even through the haze. Hours passed. Pain blurred into exhaustion. Exhaustion blurred into the strange, powerful instinct to bring this life into the world. And then suddenly, everything shifted. The room filled with urgency voices, rising in calm commands. Naomi cried out, clutching Alexander's hand with all the strength she had left. She didn't know if she was pulling him toward her or holding on to him to keep from breaking apart. He leaned over her, his lips pressed to her damp forehead, whispering, "You're almost there. Just a little more. I'm here, Naomi. I'm not going anywhere." And then, just like that, another sound filled the room. A cry. High, sharp, miraculous. Naomi froze. The world froze. Everything inside her stilled, as if her heart forgot how to beat. She heard Alexander suck in a breath, a sound so raw, it didn't sound like him at all. She turned her head just enough to see the doctor lifting a tiny, wiggling form into the air. The baby's skin was flushed like rose petals, her fists clenched in outraged protest against the world she had just entered. Naomi's vision blurred with tears she didn't try to stop. But it wasn't her tears that surprised her. It was his. Alexander was crying. Not silently, not discreetly. He let the tears fall openly, as if he had no space left to hide anything anymore. The doctor gently placed the baby in his arms, first tradition for the father, and he exhaled a sound that was almost a sob, almost a prayer. Naomi watched through her own tears as he held their daughter for the first time. He looked at the infant as if she were the first living thing he had ever seen. His lips trembled as he whispered something she couldn't hear. He turned to her slowly, reverently, and placed the tiny warm bundle into her arms. "Naomi," he whispered, voice breaking. "Meet Arya Sterling." Arya. A name he had chosen weeks before in secret, holding on to hope he was afraid to speak aloud. The name fit her instantly. Naomi felt her whole world shift, realign, soften, become something new entirely. She cradled the baby against her chest, inhaling the sweet, warm scent of newborn skin, and something deep inside her cracked open a love she hadn't known she was capable of, a devotion too vast to describe. Alexander cupped the back of her head, leaning in to press a trembling kiss to her temple. His arms came around both of them, protective, gentle, full of a kind of awe she had never seen on another person's face. They didn't need vows, or promises, or rings. They didn't need to say anything at all. In that moment, drenched in sweat and tears, and the lingering scent of rain carried in on his clothes, she felt it completely. They were a family. Not by contract, not by obligation, but by something real, something chosen, something impossibly right. They didn't rush into anything afterward. No wedding announcements, no lavish ceremonies, no headlines declaring a new chapter in the Sterling Empire. They took it slow, savoring each day as if it were a fragile treasure. Alexander took to fatherhood with a tenderness Naomi hadn't expected from a man known for his steel spine. Every night he lay on the couch with Arya asleep on his chest, her tiny ear pressed against his heartbeat, as he hummed without even realizing it, the same tune he used to play on the piano on nights only Naomi heard him. Naomi would watch them from the doorway, smiling through tears she never tried to hide. She never thought she would see a picture of peace so pure. She opened a small art studio in the quiet town, where they decided to settle. Nothing grand, nothing polished, just a sunlit space filled with canvases and charcoal pencils and the soft laughter of locals who visited more for her warmth than her paintings. She filled sketchbooks with images of Arya's tiny hands, Alexander's quiet smiles, evenings spent on the balcony watching the sky fade from blue to pink to dusk. She rediscovered herself not as a surrogate, not as a survivor, but as an artist, a mother, a woman who had walked through fire to reach the softest part of her own life. Alexander, for his part, did something no one expected from a man of his stature. He created a foundation for surrogate mothers, providing healthcare, legal protection, education, and emotional support. He poured his energy into it with a passion that made people whisper. Naomi knew the truth behind that passion. He had seen what desperation looked like up close. He had fallen in love with a woman shaped by sacrifice. He wanted to honor every woman like her. He wanted to honor her. And so their days unfolded gently, peacefully. No empire to impress, no contracts to fulfill. Just the messy, beautiful, imperfect reality of a small family learning to breathe again. At night, they sat together on the balcony, Naomi leaning against Alexander's shoulder, Arya asleep in her arms, the stars reflecting across the water like scattered promises. Sometimes they talked about their fears. Sometimes they talked about the future. Sometimes they said nothing at all, letting silence weave itself around them like a soft blanket. Their love didn't begin in freedom. It began in chaos, confusion, rules, and forbidden glances. But it matured into something stronger, softer, a love chosen rather than stolen. A love built not on perfection, but on courage. The end